Hello everyone, Dr. Yonit Arthur here. You are on The Steady Coach, and today we're going to be talking about a symptom I am asked about quite frequently, and that is brain fog and difficulties concentrating. And yes, these are very, very common among people suffering from neural circuit dizziness, which is the term I use on my channel to describe medically unexplained chronic dizziness symptoms. Typically, folks who have these symptoms end up diagnosed with PPPD, MdDS, or vestibular migraine, but you may have a plethora of other diagnoses, including post-concussion syndrome, uncompensated or decompensated vestibular neuritis or labyrinthitis, and others. In this video, we're going to be talking about why brain fog is such a highly common symptom here, and we're going to be talking about some ways to help you deal with it directly. So first, what is brain fog? Anyone who's experienced it already knows, but we're talking about a general sense of fuzziness or lack of clarity in your thinking. You may have difficulties remembering things or remembering particular words. You may feel like you lose your train of thought frequently, or you may feel a general sense of mental tiredness. Why does this happen so frequently for people with neural circuit dizziness? Well, there are two components here, but both of them have to do with brain overload. And we're going to talk about brain overload in just a moment. But for those of you with neural circuit dizziness, you're getting brain overload from two directions, both your vestibular system and the stress response system. So from the vestibular system, we are dealing with three sensory systems that contribute to balance. Normally, your brain processes all of this behind the scenes. Things go smoothly, you don't have brain fog, but when anything goes wrong in that system, when your brain is not processing that sensory information correctly, it can overload your brain. And we'll talk more again about that in a moment. But just as importantly, when your body is in a state of chronic stress, in other words, when your nervous system is in a state of chronically responding to perceived threats, that also puts a lot of strain on your brain. When your brain thinks that you're under threat, it is going to spend all of its resources on survival mechanisms. And again, that leads to fewer resources to do some of these other things that you need to do, like concentrate, like think clearly, like retrieve words. So let's get kind of an eagle's eye view of what this means to have brain overload. So I want you to think of your brain like a factory, okay? It has raw materials that come into the factory. Stuff happens to those raw materials, and then on the other end, we're producing a finished product. The raw materials your factory is getting is sensory information. So all the information that all of your senses provide to the brain. And then on the other end, the end product of your brain factory is your perception. In other words, what you actually experience. Before you ever had chronic dizziness, this was still how things worked. And you know this because, for example, if you were doing something that you really enjoyed and a friend or family member came over and talked to you, you might not have heard what they said. That's because your factory was really focused on perceiving the thing that you were interested in. And that meant that even though the person was right there talking to you, that sensory information was being discarded as part of the production process. Another example, have you ever banged your elbow and not known how you got the bruise? That certainly happened to me. I was in the middle of cooking dinner, I was busy with something else, didn't notice it. Oh, wow, when did I get that bruise? That really hurts. This is an example of when my factory was focused on the output of making dinner, and all the sensory information related to banging my elbow just didn't become relevant to me. It wasn't part of the final product the factory gave me. Okay, so to go deeper into this factory metaphor now, what happens when someone doesn't have a vestibular disorder is that your brain has a processing system, an automatic processing system that carefully sorts all information that's coming in from the outside. So inside your factory, you have an automatic assembly line that takes all of the sensory information and categorizes it neatly. Then your factory workers, let's say you have 5 of them, your 5 factory workers don't have a lot of work to do. A lot of this information is already sorted for them, and they can just make minor adjustments as needed, and out pops the end product. Not a lot of extra worker effort. When you have a neural circuit dizziness problem, your pre-processing conveyor belt is doing a terrible job. So rather than giving your factory workers some neatly categorized boxes of stuff, you're getting a whole jumbled mess of all sorts of stuff mixed together. And your factory workers have to manually go in and sort everything through. Now, which one of these 2 processes do you think is more efficient? Obviously, the first one. The second one is going to require all sorts of time and effort on the side of the factory workers. This is what leads to brain fog. Your factory workers are so busy trying to sort through this giant box of junk that your sensory system sent through and that your conveyor belt didn't process properly, that they really don't have a lot of leftover capacity to do other things, like think clearly, like do complex math, like remember stuff. Again, you only have a limited number of workers. So if we're going to solve the problem of brain fog, we have 2 options. We can make the workers better, stronger, more efficient, or we can reduce the load of work we're asking the workers to do. So on this first end of things, helping make our workers stronger and more efficient, these are things that are going to relate mainly to your lifestyle. You're going to support your workers with things like making sure that you're getting good quality sleep. And again, we've talked about this in previous videos, but one of the most important components of getting good sleep are having set wake up and sleep times. And I have an entire video about these techniques that I will link to in the video description below. The second thing you can do is support your body with good quality nutrition. And here's something I want to make a very important note about, because I know many of the people here on my channel tend toward anxiety, not all of you. But when I say I want you to support you with good nutrition, I really want you to think about that in terms of giving yourself more support rather than taking stuff away because those things are going to hurt you. That mindset of abundance, of adding more nutrition to support yourself in functioning optimally, is going to lead to better outcomes for your mental health and your physical health, because you're going to be able to actually stick with this. Whereas when you feel like you're just slowly taking away all the things that you actually like, that's going to tank your mindset and it's going to be a lot harder to stick to it. I don't advocate for any particular diet here, and most people absolutely do not need one. But the more whole foods that you can incorporate into your life with lots of colorful fruits and vegetables, the better. You want to avoid dehydration, make sure you're drinking enough. And then one more lifestyle thing that I think is probably undersold is the value of practicing mindfulness. And I don't mean mindfulness specifically for symptoms or anything like that. What I mean simply is that you can actually train your mind to focus and unfocus your attention on various things. This is like a muscle that can be trained. With mindfulness meditation, you can train your factory workers to be more efficient at their jobs. And this requires a consistent practice that may have absolutely nothing to do with any of the other things we talk about on my channel, like emotional work and self-compassion. This is plain old practicing focusing your attention, as in a practice that involves focusing on your breath or some other sensation, and unfocusing your attention, such as open awareness meditations. So again, if this is the route you want to take, think about incorporating a daily mindfulness practice, a consistent mindfulness practice into your routine. And now we're on to the second option, which is reducing the load on your workers. And there are 2 aspects to this. There are things that are a little more behavioral, things that you can do on the outside, and then there are some things that you can do on the inside. So on the outside, before we go into any of these, I want to make a disclaimer here that I do not advocate for avoiding any particular activities. I want you to really think about if you're going to use any of these recommendations as a method for applying self-compassion. In other words, there is a big difference between the story that you tell yourself when you're avoiding something and saying, I have to do this because I have too much brain fog and I can't handle this, and saying to yourself, my body is stressed out, my workers are overloaded, I'm going to do this as a way to be kind and compassionate to myself, and we're going to do this today. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to have to do this tomorrow. Say to yourself, I am doing this as an act of self-compassion. Okay, now on to some of the things you can do. As we talked about, one of the big issues is that your brain is getting a ton of raw materials, your factory is getting a ton of materials, and your conveyor belt isn't sorting things properly, so your workers have to do all the work. Well, if you're getting less information from the outside, your workers aren't going to have to do as much work. This is why something like wearing noise-canceling headphones, especially in noisy environments, may be really helpful. Again, as a temporary mitigation technique, as an act of self-compassion. For many people, this actually makes a huge difference, but I do want you to know that it does not work for everyone. Some people's brains respond with even more stress when sounds are taken away. So just be aware, you're going to want to try it out and see how it works for you. There are other things you can do, like strategic planning when you're going to be in a really busy, noisy, visually stimulating environment. For example, if you're going to be going to a busy restaurant or a big event, you can request to be seated so that you're facing a corner and your back is to all of the visually stimulating, noisy stuff that's going on behind you. Again, easy to frame this as an act of self-compassion. Another thing that helps with brain fog is a technique like pacing. Pacing is a graded exposure technique that can be useful also for all sorts of other issues related to your neural circuit dizziness. But in this context, what I'm getting at here is that your factory workers may need time to adapt. And by starting slowly and very consistently progressing to more and more activities over time, you're going to give your factory time to catch up. So what this would look like, for example, if you're trying to get yourself to go back out to restaurants without feeling as much brain fog, it would be starting with a very quiet restaurant and then slowly progressing to busier and busier environments over time, but consistently going out to eat so that your brain has more and more time to adapt. And finally, little things like building in breaks, giving yourself permission to step out if you need to. Also, these can be very helpful for brain fog. And if you're already saying to yourself, yeah, that's all well and good, I actually want this to go away, do not worry, we're going to be talking about that next. I'm just trying to give you some techniques to help you with the symptoms as they are right now. So now we're going to go to that second dimension. This is again relating to what can you do to reduce the stress on your factory workers. And we're going to be looking now at what's going on the inside. So remember, your factory workers have other things to do in your brain. They don't just want to sort sensory information. They're also responsible for things like managing stress, dealing with anxious thoughts, etc. So when all of that other stuff is also going on, they have more and more work and they're under more and more stress, and they're going to have fewer resources to devote to things like concentration and math problems. So this is where it's really important, and I talk about this in pretty much every video, for you to look at the kinds of internal stressors that exist inside you that are perhaps increasing the load on yourself and on your thinking and feeling. And this is why it's so important and why I talk about this so frequently, to look inside and say, what are the sources of stress and how are they really affecting me on the inside? And what variables are there even on the inside that I can change so that the stress doesn't affect me as much? So again, it could be related to reducing stress on the outside, but stress on the outside affects different people differently, and you want to find out what in you may be able to modify so that stress rolls off you rather than bogging down your factory workers. So 3 things that we talk about frequently on my channel related to this are relationships, your personality traits or the way you treat yourself essentially, and emotions. I have relevant videos for each of these that I will put in the video description, so please check those out if you want more detail here. But one thing I really want to highlight here is that very high functioning people tend to be the ones who end up with neural circuit dizziness in the first place. And I've talked about this in previous videos, so it's a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm going to be talking about here today. But suffice it to say that the people who end up with neural circuit dizziness also tend to be the type of people who are going to shame and judge themselves for having neural circuit dizziness issues like brain fog. Of course, this is completely natural. I don't know anyone who would be perfectly happy with brain fog. But what I'm talking about is the fact that people with neural circuit dizziness tend to have very high standards for themselves and tend to feel particularly hard on themselves when they have a symptom like brain fog. And for that reason, I have an entire video about shame and how to deal with self-judgment and shame regarding your symptoms. So I will put that in the video description as well. Another important note to highlight here is that as you're looking critically at your relationships, at your emotions, at the way that you treat yourself, you really want to also remember outcome independence. And what that means is that you are not going to look at those relationships, emotions, and the way you treat yourself and say, I'm doing this because this is the only way I'm going to solve my symptoms, and I expect my symptoms to go down the second I resolve one of these stressors. Because neural circuit dizziness is driven by attention, by danger mode, and fear and anxiety, if you are doing things specifically to make the symptoms go away, you're also sending your brain the signal that the symptoms are important. So you want to take the opposite approach. You can know, of course, that you're doing this because you have symptoms and you want them to go away. But when you're working on your relationships and these other situations that I described, and you're trying to reduce your internal stress, you really want to do so in a way in which you're emphasizing your personal growth and fulfillment and feeling better overall, not just reducing symptoms. So as you work on all of these things, the one thing I want to leave you with is know that these symptoms will resolve as you recover from your other symptoms. Brain fog is incredibly common among people with chronic dizziness, and as the dizziness symptoms start to go away, as they start to feel better, the brain fog lifts. And that will happen for you too. So there isn't necessarily anything specific that you must do just for the brain fog. So I don't want you to feel like you need to sit around combating your brain fog specifically with anything we talked about in this video. Ultimately, if you take care of yourself and you address the stressors that are in your life, and you know that the brain fog is a temporary, non-dangerous symptom, it's just related to the overload your brain's dealing with right now, and it will resolve as you get better, you're gonna get better. I hope this video was helpful. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment, please ask questions below, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. These things help me reach more people. And thank you for tuning in. Bye, everyone.